Okay, this is TEKS 9D exponential equations and their attribute notes. Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you guys already completed the first two ed puzzles, so the ones over exponential graph notes and the one over exponential graph practice. If you have not completed those first two videos, please go back and do that before you start this video. Okay, so let's begin. So the note sections, just like on graphs, we have the three things. We have the y-intercept, or the starting value. We have asymptote, and then we have growth versus decay. So remember, our standard form for an exponential equation is y equals a b x. And if you remember from the first video, a represents our y-intercept, or our starting value. So A represents the y-intercept or starting value, and then B represents if it's a growth or decay. So remember, we know that it's a growth if B is greater than 1, and we know it's a decay if B is less than 1. So this B represents growth or decay, while A represents the starting value. Okay, so let's look at some examples. Oh yeah, real quick. Asymptote, if you guys remember from the first and second video, in Algebra 1, the asymptote is always going to be y equals 0. No matter what, the asymptote is y equals 0. Okay, now let's look at the examples and begin. So example 1 says y is equal to 1/3 6 to the x power. So remember, we have y is equal to abx, where a is the y-intercept and b is the growth if b is greater than 1, or the decay if b is less than 1. And x is just that exponent. So the first question says, is it a growth or decay? So we need to look at the b value, and that's this value right here, 6. We have to determine, is 6 smaller than 1 or bigger than 1? So since 6 is bigger than 1, this is a growth. So this is a growth because 6 is greater than 1. Then it says, what is the y-intercept or starting value? Remember, the y-intercept or the starting value is the a value, and the a value is that number in front, which is 1/3. So 1/3 is the starting value. And then remember, for every single one of these problems this year, the asymptote is always going to be y equals 0. Okay, and that's it for example 1. So let's look at example 2. Again, same thing. We're dealing with the equation y equals abx, where a is the y-intercept, b is growth if it's greater than 1, and then decay if it's less than 1. Okay. So the first part says, is it a growth or decay? So we have to look at the b value, which is here. And since 2 is bigger than 1, it's a growth. So it's a growth since 2 is greater than 1. Then it says, what is the y-intercept? And we know the y-intercept is the a value, and we know the a value is 10. And then what is the asymptote? We know the asymptote is always y equals 0. Okay. Let's look at number 3. You should have it down by now, like what A represents and what B represents. So the question says, is it a growth or decay? So remember that B represents growth or decay. So right here, this is the B value. So since this is 1/9 and 1/9 is smaller than 1, this is a decay. So this is a decay since 1/9 is less than 1. Then it says, what is the y-intercept, or the starting value? We know that the starting value is always a, so that's 5. And then what is the asymptote? We know always the y-asymptote is y equals 0. Okay, let's look at the last example. For number 4, it says y is equal to 6 times 5/4 x. It says, is this a growth or decay? So remember, it's a growth if b is greater than 1. It's a decay if b is less than 1. So 5/4, remember, 5/4 is the same as 1 1/4. So is this bigger than 1 or smaller than 1? It's bigger than 1. So since this is bigger than 1, this is a growth. So don't let the fraction fool you. Just because it's a fraction doesn't necessarily mean it's a decay. This is an improper fraction, meaning it is greater than 1. Okay, what is the y-intercept? The y-intercept is always that a value, so in this case the y-intercept is 6. And then lastly, what is the asymptote? Our asymptote is y equals 0 always. Remember, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and send me an email.